Every time I wheeled down that hallway, my wheelchair would creak and squeal, like a sad song I couldn't stop playing. Through the living room door, I could hear my family's laughter, the sound squeezing my heart like a vice. In my mind, they were laughing at me, though I knew that wasn't rational. When I entered the room, their laughter died instantly, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to suck all the air from the room. My mother greeted me with a hesitant smile, asking if I was awake. I forced a smile, trying to ignore my sister Angela's nervous fidgeting on the sofa and my father Keith's sudden fascination with his phone. I told them I'd heard voices and thought I might join the conversation. The silence stretched on like an endless rubber band. I could almost see the gears turning in my mother's head as she searched for an excuse. Before she could finish her awkward, "Well," I cut her off. "You're having family time," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Don't worry, I know when I'm not wanted." As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, my disheveled hair, my too thin body, and the wheelchair that had become as much a part of me as my own limbs. For a moment, I saw myself through their eyes, a burden, a shame, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. But then I remembered my grandmother Grace's words, telling me that I wasn't defined by how others saw me, but by my own actions. With newfound determination, I turned my wheelchair back around to face them. I told them that I existed, that I was family too, whether they liked it or not. The shocked expressions on their faces almost made me laugh. I was born with cerebral palsy, raised in a family that valued perfect appearances over inner beauty. From the day I was born, it was clear I wasn't part of their ideal family picture. I still remember that day, when I overheard my mother on the phone with her friend. Her voice was quiet, but not quiet enough to hide her words from me. She told her friend how difficult it was, how I was different. Different was just a polite way of saying ruined, because in my parents' eyes, I had destroyed their perfect life and their perfect family with my imperfect body. When my sister Angela was born, I was 5 years old, and that's when I truly understood what it meant to be invisible to my family. Angela had everything I didn't. She was cute, cheerful, and most importantly to my parents, she was normal. It was like a switch flipped in my parents the moment she was born. Suddenly, there were family outings, picnics in the park, trips to the zoo, all the things that had been pointless when I was their only child. I would watch from my bedroom window as they loaded up the car. I'd see Angela laughing in my mother's arms, my father checking they hadn't forgotten anything. Then they would leave, abandoning me with a hired nurse for the day. My father would say, without meeting my eyes, that it was for my own good, that I wouldn't enjoy it anyway. But he was wrong. I could have felt the sun on my face, heard the city sounds, felt like a part of the world. And so, I learned to live in a world of my own making. I devoured books, immersed myself in art, and wrote poetry that no one would ever read. My wheelchair became my chariot, and my room transformed into my kingdom. I thought if they didn't want me in their world, I would create my own. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, this was enough. The loneliness ate away at me like rust on metal. The family photos on the display shelf where I was conspicuously absent, the school events my parents never attended, the birthday parties I was never invited to, they all left scars deeper than any physical limitation ever could. The only person who truly saw me, who genuinely understood me, was my grandmother Grace. She was like nature itself, with her lavender perfume and a smile so bright it could illuminate even the darkest corners of my world. She would find me and proudly escort me from my room to the living room, ignoring my mother's barely concealed discomfort. She would ask me what I'd been doing, genuinely wanting to hear everything. I would tell her about my stories, my attempts at painting, and my dreams that grew wilder with each passing day. She truly listened, in a way no one else ever had. She would tell me, in a voice low but firm, that I had extraordinary talent. She insisted that I should never let anyone, not even my parents, make me feel less than I was. It was her who first suggested I attend regular school instead of the special education facility my parents had chosen. The argument that followed was fierce. My mother insisted I needed to be with children like me. Grandma fired back, asking if she meant smart, creative, full of potential children, just like me, because yes, that's exactly who I should be with. After a long battle, Grandma won, as she always did when it came to my welfare. So at 13, I entered a regular middle school for the first time, half terrified and half excited. Those first few weeks were challenging, to put it mildly. The stares, the whispers, the pointing, everything I'd feared happened, and then some. But gradually, things began to shift. People started seeing me, not the wheelchair, not the cerebral palsy, but me. I made my first real friend, a girl named Amy with a wild spirit and a laugh that could fill the entire cafeteria. One day, she sat next to me at lunch and said my wheelchair wheels were cool, asking if I wanted to share her cookies. Suddenly, my world expanded like a balloon being filled with air. I started joining study groups and attending pajama parties, always at friends' houses, of course. I didn't want to burden my parents with the sight of me socializing with other children. I joined the school newspaper, discovered my talent for photography, and even went to my first school dance. But as my world grew larger, the gap between my family and me seemed to widen. Every success I had, every new friend I made, every step toward independence seemed to push them further away. They seemed unsure how to handle this new version of me, someone who no longer hid in her room and who wasn't afraid to be seen and heard. The turning point came during my senior year of high school. My photographs were selected for display at a local art gallery, a huge honor that represented months of hard work. When I told my parents, their response was lukewarm at best. My mother barely looked up from her magazine, asking if it was somewhere accessible by wheelchair. Though her indifference stung like salt in a wound, I was determined not to let it dampen my enthusiasm. On the night of the exhibition, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. Grandma helped me pick out a new dress, and Amy did my makeup. For the first time in my life, I felt beautiful and confident. My heart was pounding as I waited by the front door for the car to arrive. When I heard it pull up, I thought finally I could show my family what I was capable of. Finally, they would see me as more than just their inconvenient daughter. I opened the front door with my biggest smile, calling out to ask if they were ready. My mother appeared first, followed by my father and Angela. They were all dressed up elegantly, Mom in a fitted black dress, Dad in a suit, and Angela in a pink dress covered in frills. My mother looked at me with obvious confusion and asked where I was going. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I stammered about the art show, reminding them that I'd told them about my photography exhibition tonight. I watched my parents exchange that look I'd seen too many times before. It was a mixture of guilt and relief, guilt for forgetting, relief at having an excuse not to go. My father's voice dripped with false sympathy as he told me he'd completely forgotten that they had tickets to Angela's dance recital that night, something they planned months ago. The world seemed to go dark around me. Of course they would choose Angela's recital over my photography show. What had I been expecting? I heard myself say it was okay, that it wasn't a big deal, telling them to enjoy the recital. The words felt hollow as something inside me shattered. They left with promises of making it up to me, but I barely heard them. I sat there in the empty house, staring at the front door long after they'd gone. An hour later, Grandma found me still sitting in the same spot, silent tears rolling down my cheeks. She pulled me into a tight embrace, asking me what they'd done this time, insisting that I tell her everything. I told her everything, the words pouring out of me, like a flood of pain and anger. She listened, her face growing darker with each word. Finally, she declared in a firm voice that it was enough, that we wouldn't let their selfishness ruin my special night. She told me we were going to the gallery, and that tonight, I would shine brighter than any star in the sky. And so we left, Grace proudly escorting me to the gallery, her head held high with a defiant attitude that dared anyone to object. It was a magical night. People praised my photographs. Even a local magazine writer called me an up-and-coming artist and asked to interview me for an article. That night, I wasn't April in the wheelchair, I was just April, an artist, a photographer, a human being. As we left the gallery, my heart soaring and clutching my first sold pieces check, I turned to Grandma. I thanked her with a voice full of emotion for believing in me, for truly seeing me. She squeezed my hand, her eyes sparkling as she told me she had always seen me, and now the world was finally catching up. I didn't know then that this night was just the beginning. While it marked my journey to self-acceptance, it was also the start of a storm that would tear my family apart and force them to face the ugly truths they'd hidden for so long. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind wouldn't stop spinning with the day's events. I wondered if I was ready for the changes that were coming in my life. I questioned whether I had enough strength to protect myself and demand the respect and love I deserved. Most importantly, I wondered if my family was ready to face the consequences of their years of neglect. I didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in my life, I felt ready to find them. A few weeks after my success at the gallery, subtle changes began to occur in our house. My parents seemed to sense the shift in the air and began making awkward attempts at inclusion. Suddenly, they were inviting me to family dinners, asking about my day, even offering to drive me to school. But it all felt hollow, it was too little, too late. One Saturday morning, as I sat at the breakfast table with my family for the first time in ages, my father cleared his throat. He started with what seemed like a forced smile, telling me that he and Mom had been thinking about their upcoming 20th wedding anniversary. He suggested making a family video, a look back at their lives together. I nearly choked on my toast. A family video? Including me? It seemed too good to be true. Yet I wanted to believe, even though a voice deep inside warned me not to get my hopes up. My mother jumped in with an overly bright smile, saying how wonderful it would be if we could all participate, to show how close we'd been as a family. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. How close we've been. That's funny, considering I spent most of my life barely allowed to leave my room, I said. The silence that followed was deafening. Angela, who had been peacefully playing with her cereal, suddenly became intensely focused on her bowl. My father's face turned red, and my mother's smile became rigid with tension. My father started in an intimidating tone, telling me I was going too far, that they had always done their best for me. Your best. I repeated, my voice heavy with doubt. Leaving me behind on every family trip? Forgetting my photography show? Making me feel like a burden every single day, that was your best? My words hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. For a moment, I caught something in my mother's eyes, guilt, perhaps regret, but it vanished quickly, replaced by her usual mask of artificial brightness. She abruptly declared that we should let the past be the past, that making this video would be about moving forward and celebrating our family together. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was their way of reconciliation, that they would finally see me as a true member of the family. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to participate. The following weeks were busy. They hired a videographer, prepared costumes, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly valued by my parents. We filmed at the park where my parents had their first date, the church where they got married, and the house where we all grew up. The videographer, Bella, did her best to make sure I was included in every scene without strain but still prominently featured. One day, while setting up a scene, she told me I had real presence and would make an excellent photographer myself. She asked if I'd ever considered a career in photography or film. I blushed at the compliment, not used to such positive attention. I admitted that I loved photography, but had never thought I could make a career of it. Bella's eyes lit up as she told me I absolutely could, offering me her business card and insisting we talk more about the industry. She believed talented artists deserved opportunities regardless of physical limitations. When she handed me her card, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a future for me beyond my parents' expectations. Then came the screening day, coinciding with my parents' 20th anniversary party. Grandma's expansive grounds had been transformed into an outdoor theater, complete with a massive screen and rows of comfortable seating. As guests began to arrive, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Finally, I thought, this would be the moment I would be recognized as a true member of the family. As the sun began to set, bathing the venue in warm light, my father stood before the guests to make his opening remarks. His voice rang out across the lawn as he thanked everyone for sharing this milestone with them. He spoke about how blessed they were to have such wonderful friends and family, then suggested we begin our journey down memory lane. The screen lit up, and I held my breath as the video began. There were my parents on their wedding day, young and radiant. Then came scenes from their early years together, vacations, parties, quiet moments at home. I waited anxiously for my appearance, for the moment I would become part of the story. But as their life timeline unfolded on screen, a sinking feeling grew in my stomach. There were scenes with friends, colleagues, extended family, but I was nowhere to be seen. My heart leaped when footage of my mother's pregnancy appeared. This is it, I thought. This would be my entrance. But no, the next scene showed newborn Angela. There was Mom holding her with pure love, Dad hovering proudly beside them. The video continued, showing Angela's growth, first steps, school enrollment, dance recitals, family trips. It was like watching a fantasy world where I had never existed. I sat there frozen, watching in disbelief. Even the scenes we'd recently filmed had been edited to remove me completely. As the reality of what was happening sank in, it felt like a physical blow to my stomach. This wasn't a mistake or oversight, it was intentional. My family had deliberately erased me from their history. Grandma, who had been sitting beside me gripping my hand throughout the screening, suddenly stood up and strode toward the projector, switching it off. An uncomfortable silence fell over the lawn. Her voice cut through the night air like a knife as she called out my parents' first names. Judy. Keith. What is this? She demanded. The guests began to whisper nervously. My father stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation, telling her not to make a scene. But she wouldn't stop. Erasing your own daughter from family history, isn't that the real scene you're making? She challenged. My mother's face turned pale. She stammered that it wasn't like that they just wanted to show their best face, that April's presence might be a bit awkward. Grandma let out a dry laugh. Oh, how amusing, Judy, she said. Where should I begin? Should we talk about how you wanted to give her up the day she was born? How I had to promise financial support before you'd agree to raise your own daughter? A collective gasp rose from the crowd. I felt sick to my stomach. All these years, I'd known they hadn't wanted me, but hearing it stated so plainly was something else entirely. Grandma continued, her voice rising. She'd supported this family for years, even paid for their vacations. All she had wanted was for them to love their daughter, to love me, and they couldn't even do that. Suddenly, Angela burst forward. "Shut up," she screamed, "just shut up. April is embarrassing." I didn't want her in the video either. I couldn't believe my ears. I had thought Angela, at least, understood me. Grandma turned to my parents with an icy expression, saying they'd done well raising a daughter to be just as intolerant as they were. Then she dropped her biggest bombshell: I would be her sole heir, all her wealth would go to me. My mother exploded in rage, saying I didn't need money, I needed a full-time nurse. "Get out," Grandma said in a low voice. When no one moved, she repeated it louder, "Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I'm tired of supporting your lifestyle. I'm done." For a moment, no one moved. Then my mother laughed nervously, asking if she was joking. Grandma cut her off, saying she had never been more serious in her life, demanding they leave immediately and never come back. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. My stunned parents and Angela gathered their belongings and left. Grandma slammed the gate behind them with enough force to echo across the lawn. As the dust settled, I noticed movement around me. The guests who had witnessed this terrible scene began approaching me one by one. Aunt Cindy hugged me tightly, Uncle Kevin awkwardly but sincerely patted my shoulder. Even my parents' friends, who had never given me a second glance, came forward to show their support. In the days that followed, my life changed dramatically. I moved into Grandma's large house and, for the first time in my life, found myself surrounded by love and support. It was like entering a completely new world, one where I wasn't a dirty secret to be hidden, but a human being worthy of love and respect. About a week after the family collapse, Grandma sat me down for a talk. Her eyes had their usual sparkle as she asked me what I wanted to do with my future. I blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked me that before. I'd always been expected to simply exist and be cared for, never imagined to have dreams of my own. I don't know, I stammered, "I've never thought about it." "Then start thinking about it now," she said gently, "the world is yours now. You're free to do anything." Suddenly, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. "I love writing," I said with a strength in my voice I didn't know I had, "and photography. I think I can create something unique, something no one can ignore." Her face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? We'll get you enrolled in the best art and literature program right away." Before I knew it, I was enrolled in the art department at a nearby university. Grandma made sure the campus was completely accessible and even hired a part-time assistant to help me with physical tasks I couldn't manage alone. On my first day of college, I was terrified. But the stares, whispers, and pitying looks I'd imagined never came. Yes, people noticed my wheelchair, but out of curiosity, not discrimination. And when they got to know me, they saw the real me. The wheelchair was just a part of me, not what defined me. I threw myself into my studies with a passion I didn't know I possessed. Literature opened up entirely new worlds, and professors encouraged me to explore my own voice through poetry. In photography classes, I learned new techniques and ways to express thoughts and feelings I'd kept locked away for years. My poems started winning contests, and my photographs were displayed in student exhibitions. For the first time in my life, I was being judged by my abilities, not my physical limitations. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were days when the pain, both physical and emotional, was overwhelming. And despite everything, there were times I missed my parents and Angela. But I had Grandma, and I had my art. Gradually, I built my own life. And now, 5 years later, I'm holding my first published book of poetry. It's thin and unadorned, but it's mine. My creation. Every word, every accompanying photograph, was born from me, from my experiences, my pain, my joy, my growth. I can't help but smile as I flip through the pages and read the dedication to Grandma, who taught me that being different isn't a flaw, but a feature. And to all who have ever felt worthless, may you discover your true power. As I run my fingers over the embossed cover, I still can't believe this is real. That my story is out there, for anyone to read. It's scary but exciting. I can't help but reflect on my journey. I often wonder if those years of pain and rejection, of being treated as if I didn't exist, made me stronger or just left me scarred. If I could go back, would anything change? There's probably no clear answer. But one thing is certain, I am no longer invisible. I exist, I am seen, and I have a voice that will be heard. And I'm using that voice to tell stories, my story and the stories of others who have been pushed to the margins. What do you think? Was I right to cut ties with my family? Should I have fought harder for their acceptance, or was distance the best choice for my own well-being? While I look forward to reading your comments, I should tell you that this story isn't over yet. Last month, I had a photography exhibition opening in a major city titled Invisible No More, a collection of photographs and poems capturing people like me, who society had rendered invisible. And to my surprise, Angela showed up at the opening reception. She came alone, looking thin and tired, with dark circles under her eyes, having lost her former sparkle. She told me our parents had divorced, Dad had moved overseas, and Mom had started a new family. Angela was living on her own now. April. She stammered about what I said that day. I'm so sorry. I took a deep breath, feeling no anger or hatred anymore. Instead, I understood that we were both victims of our parents' values. Would you like to sit and talk? I offered. That night, we had our first real conversation as sisters. She acknowledged her mistakes, and I forgave her. We decided not to aim for a perfect relationship, but to build a new one, step by step. Today, I teach photography at an art college, their first professor in a wheelchair. I run workshops, celebrating differences. Grandma remains my biggest supporter. With her help, I've established a studio for artists with disabilities. Sometimes, when I watch these young artists, I see my former self in them. As for my parents, I occasionally glimpse their lives through newspapers and social media. Mom's new family looks perfect. Dad seems successful abroad. Strangely, it doesn't hurt anymore. What brings me more joy are the letters I receive from people who've seen my work or read my book. When someone writes, "Your work gave me the courage to speak up," it warms my heart. I guess life is all about choices, waiting for acceptance or forging your own path. I chose the latter. And now, I can proudly say, I am April. An artist, a teacher, and the protagonist of my own life. This is my story. And it's only the beginning. Please like, subscribe, and share your own stories in the comments below.